Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Students of Sales. We've got, as always, Sir Philip Mann and Dr. Michael
Hello.
Mason joining me.
Hey, what's up, guys?
In today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about, before we obviously get into some of the sales stuff, we got to talk about getting the sales job. So let's say you've completely lost your mind, you have no other options in life, and you've decided, I am going to get into sales. So, first of all, have a long, hard thought on that. But you've made that decision. So, whether it's your first sales gig, maybe it's SDR, maybe you're going full cycle, maybe you're currently in a sales role, but you do want to make a change for whatever reason, right? Change is always good. In today's episode, we're going to talk about our best practices and some of the things, over the, hundreds, if not thousands of interviews we've, been in, but also ran some of the best practices we can give back to our audience today. So hopefully go through this a little quickly, but also hope that everybody takes away at least one or two good things that they can implement immediately to find that next role. And then ultimately what we're really after is getting that offer, right? Because the interview is only good if you get the offer. So I'll start this off with Phil. So Phil, from your perspective, like if you're in the market right now, so there's a lot of different ways that you can go about finding your sale, your next sales role. How would you go about kind of starting that journey? Where would you look? What would you do? How would you go about it?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler. So I need to preface this with total honesty and say I've been with my company for 12 years, so it's been a while since I've actually gone and looked for a job. But if I was going to look tomorrow, it would be a combination of a couple of things. You know, I don't think it should just be about going to job boards and uploading your resumes and stuff like that. That's kind of option three, but we'll get there. But step one is or option one is just tap into your network, your family, friends, cousins, whoever it might be, buddy of a buddy. If you know companies are hiring, just, like if you don't have a network, build one, connect with some people on LinkedIn that you met or know or live in your area and stuff like that. Ask them if they know there's any companies that are hiring. It's much, much, much more effective to get into a company, or much more likely to get into a company if you're getting referred by an existing employee, and as someone who hires all the time, I really, really love referral candidates. So, and also it's great to know a person inside of a company. You can kind of get their firsthand experience of what it's like to work there and stuff like that. So you don't want to go down the whole garden path of a business and then actually not know anyone that works there and not really have any insight to how the company works and if they're a great company to work for. So option one would be just kind of see if you can tap into anyone that you might know who might work for a company that's hiring. That's kind of step one for me. Step two would be, again, before going to the job boards, I'd kind of, I'd go to Google and, let's say if I'm trying to get into a tech sales role or something like that, SDR, AE, whatever it might be. I would just Google, fastest growing tech companies in the US right now, or if you're trying to get a remote role, you'd probably type in US. If you were looking for maybe an in-office role, if you lived in Arizona or Atlanta, you'd type in those cities, whatever it might be. And just see what companies come up, and check out the websites, and if you like the look of them, actually apply directly through the company, not through those job boards. Because if you think about it, recruiters probably have you know preferences of how they contact candidates, and they probably appreciate people coming direct to them versus the job boards. So if it was me, I'd kind of Google, get some active companies, see if I could research some companies that excite me, products. Before I kind of go down all the interviews, I'd probably do some research on the companies online. But that's kind of what I do. And interestingly, I did that right before this conversation. I Googled, fastest growing tech companies in the US, and there was 100 companies. And I went into, 5 or 6 of the first kind of businesses on the list, and they all have like, open roles on their website. So it's really, really interesting to just go in and maybe do it that way. And then option three, we kind of talked about it already, is the job boards. I'm not too sure of the big ones nowadays. I know of Indeed. I don't know if Monster's still rocking around, or Career Builder, or I know the bigger ones. There's probably lots of smaller ones as well. So it would be a combination of those three things. That's kind of how I'd approach it, Tyler.
That's good. I mean, Mace, what do you think? So, obviously we got the tried and true, the job boards. And I think Phil brings up some good points there of, do your homework first, like kind of start, shortlisting like maybe where you want to work. Because I think one thing, I always think of is in sales roles, right? With a healthy company, a sales role, if there's, 30, 40 plus salespeople, they usually will take on another salesperson, even if they're not posting. So that's some, food for thought for people. Even if it's not posted, but you really want to work for that company, it might be a place to start. But what do you think, Mace? I mean, what's kind of your, if you were back in the job market today, like what would you do to kind of go find that role to hunt down
Yeah.
first?
Well, my mindset immediately goes to treat it just like you would prospecting in a sales role, right? When we started our inside sales team, where I'm currently at now, right? We started with what's the ideal customer profile, right? So what's the ideal kind of business profile for, your skill set, or the skill set that you want to acquire, because maybe you don't have any sales experience, and so you're looking for an organization that is going to provide that as part of the role, as some high level, coaching, training, development program of some sort. And what kind of businesses and industries and types of sales orgs are going to kind of match, your like current skill set, and again, long-term goals and aspirations, as far as what kind of a role do you see yourself in. um, I think back to how I had the opportunity to get connected with you guys 5 years ago, and LinkedIn was my prospecting tool. That's how I found you guys. Coincidentally, I used it to kind of break down the types of businesses that I was interested in. Specifically, I was interested in SaaS, and I wanted an organization that was within my kind of local area. This was before work from home was even a conversation for most sales inside sales jobs. So that made it a lot easier for me to kind of limit my search down. And based on a handful of other parameters, I ultimately found you guys, and you guys all know that the rest is history there. And so I recommend treating it the same way you would do your prospecting. Right. Once you've kind of identified who your ideal businesses are, then you want to start your outreach approach, right? And you want to use a multi-channel approach. You want to use email, you want to use LinkedIn, right? You want to use the telephone. LinkedIn was great because I could see who worked for the organization. I was able to easily identify who the recruiter was, who the VP of sales was, right? So, um, you know, that is going to allow me to be able to do some outreach and set myself apart from the hundreds of other candidates that are more than likely going for these jobs, especially again if it is one of the top fastest growing sales organizations that are out there. You have to imagine you're one of hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates. So the real question now becomes the same in sales, right? CEOs, they get sales calls all the time. How do you separate yourself from everybody else that's cold calling them, right? I think the same thing is true in the application for a job role. Is how do you make yourself stick out from the rest of the crowd? So those are some of my
So you
thoughts.
said, no, it's a good thought. So one of the things you said in there, right? And I do think, like, because I agree, right? I think it is just like prospecting. You probably want to use multi-angle approach. I think we've talked before about kind of like the account-based marketing approach to job seeking, right? So you kind of identify it down. But one of the things we talked about, so I kind of wanted to ask you on here was, if you were new into sales today, right? You see the gold rush of like these early, venture backed type companies, these early startup companies, or, certain industries where it's like, yep, if you get in there, you're going to make, I think the average income for an SDR, according to Bravado and Reddit, would be somewhere around $800,000 a year to make 7 phone calls. I think is somewhere on average that the
Give or take.
salespeople, give or take a couple shillings in there that they love to talk about. But in all honesty, like, you're early in the journey. I think that is important. Like, what would you look for? Are you going for a small company where, hey, I can go in, have this impact, like, maybe I get a little bit more one-to-one coaching, right? There's some benefits there, maybe a potential benefit on upside of pay. Also some probably, we don't want to necessarily need to get into here, but some downsides to the pay as well. When that venture capitalist finally decides, hey, you know what, this company isn't profitable 6 months in, or the flip side, right? Which is how I started, which was kind of a bigger company where I got a lot of training. It was already established and this and that. So Mace, just to that point, like what would you recommend typically? Like smaller company, go for larger company? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? If you don't have any sales experience, you honestly you don't really know what you don't know. So you have no clue
No.
where you're gonna be best suited, whether it is a big organization or a small startup. And so I think it part of it is what do you want, right? What can you get behind? What kind of a product or a service or a business can you get behind and have confidence that should I get this role or when I get this role, I'm going to go on every call with passion, desire, confidence to sell this product, service, or solution better than anyone else. So I think that's if you don't have an idea of where to start there. What's a product that maybe you use that product, right? Maybe you're a current customer of it and you like it or you love it, and maybe use that as a kind of part of that framework. But I think it is a recipe, right? It's a combination of ingredients that determine kind of what are going to be the type of businesses. Compensation is one of those things, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Whether it's remote or whether it's face to face, that now is a big topic as well. So location, perks and benefits, um, you know, how big the company is, right? Am I going to be, one of the first few in, which, could potentially open the doors up for, leadership opportunities or growth and expansion for me if I crush it and prove myself. So I think you have to identify, what it is that you want from a personal and a professional and a financial aspect, and put all those ingredients together to again help build that list out and then, go attack it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a good point. I know I would be more the like I play it safe early on because I want to see a sales for me and I don't want all these variables in there. So like I would go, kind of a established company. Let's see how I do in here, all of that. But Phil, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a load of great points there from Mace. There's two big things I want to just pick up on. So if I was to start my career all over again and I had a choice to work for a smaller and larger company or larger company, there's benefits to both, right? There really is.
Yes,
Larger companies
absolutely.
going to
Yeah,
have probably maybe a little bit of higher base, maybe a lot more successful processes and stuff like that in place. But I think I'd probably get more attention and development from that smaller company. I'll probably get more time with leadership. I'll probably learn more about business and watch the company grow, which is kind of what my journey was. It was a much smaller company. We'd only
yeah.
like 20, 30 people inside the business. So I was kind of hands-on with the CEO and VPs almost every single day. So if you had the choice and the money was similar and both products were cool, I would just genuinely go with the smaller company. That's just my preference, just the logic behind that. But the biggest thing, which is the other point that Mace kind of touched on, which is, the product or service. Like I would genuinely take, obviously money's important. And, I think
Yeah.
what we haven't talked about is what stage of your life you're at. Like if you just need a
Yeah.
job, if you just need a paycheck, sometimes, all of these choices, there are luxuries that we don't have at a
Yes,
certain
I'll
time.
take
And
it. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Whatever the job,
And
I'll do it. Yes.
but like
I've been
me,
there. We've been there. Yeah.
but like me, I stumbled into sales. It was just like I
Yeah.
needed to get like some money coming in the door. But for me, it's not about chasing the base. You probably hear that expression in sales a lot. It's much more about the subject matter that you're going to be talking about every day. It's the product or service that it means so much more. If I know of a good friend of mine. I legitimately don't know how he talks about this thing that he does all day. It's like my worst nightmare. Like there's not enough money in the world that you could go pay me to sell that thing. I'm not going to mention any names or anything like that. But ultimately, like, if I'm going to be talking about something every day, I want to believe in it. I want to feel like it's going to make a difference. I want to feel like I'm solving a problem. So for me,
Yeah.
like, that's kind of step one. If I have that luxury in my life where it's not the paycheck isn't the most important thing. If I had two choices, one was kind of okay, interesting, a little bit more money, but then there was this really cool, new, exciting, shiny product that just really made me jump out of bed. But it was a little bit less money than the other bigger thing. I'd probably go, sell something that excites me, and it's just much more interesting to do every day. And, that really, really connects with me as a salesperson that I take that emotion and passion into my calls every day, into all the leadership meetings that I'm in. It's just, it's all about the product or service for me and much less about the money. So when you're starting off that search, like May says, maybe like, what's your ICP? What's your ideal, customer profile? What is that, ideal business you want to work for? Maybe if you're a health nut, like, if you're, if you're in the gym 3 or 4 times a week or whatever it is, like, maybe something in health might really excite you, or whatever your major might have been at college, or different stuff like that. But that's kind of, just a couple of things to kind of, I guess complement what Mace was saying there.
I've thought about, when you're saying that, I was kind of thinking back. I was listening, but I was also thinking back on some of the things I've sold. And it's like, I've sold some things where you really do have to manifest that passion, right? Like where it's like I've sold printers and like, home pest control. And it's like, I sold that with the same bit of passion as I did some things I truly, truly believed in. And just for any companies that are watching, feel free to sponsor us and we will mention you as top companies to work for. We are for sale 100%. But no, I think so. Like, just to kind of summarize all of that, I do agree. I think like it's both, dude. ABM approach, right? Account-based marketing, like go LinkedIn. There was recruiters. There are so many recruiters on LinkedIn, so you'll be able to find them easily. The standard job boards still work. I know as hiring managers, I'm sure we all still use some of the job boards out there. So they're excellent places as well. And in terms of if you don't have a network, one thing, because Phil, you're absolutely right. Tap your network, friends, family, that kind of thing. If you don't have one in sales, go find them. Go on Facebook, go on Reddit, go into, in LinkedIn, there's different groups and this and that, and go find, there's different communities, sales communities out there. The mainstream ones can be very, very saturated, but if you can find like a local sales community or something like that, just go in there and you're going to find a couple of people, and then, just make a couple of connections and see if they can make some recommendations. So you've narrowed it down. You've got this company you'd like to work for, but you hopefully have a roster of at least a few of them that you're ready to interview with, or maybe they're just the only ones where the recruiters are calling you back. Whatever the case is, right? You've nailed this. You've nailed that first part, and now you're on to the interview. So, definitely want to spend a little bit of time, back to you, Phil. So like before the interview, right? So they called you, emailed you, whatever, told you that good news. Yep, we want to meet further with you. So give us some tips before you meet with that company. What are some of the things you're doing prior to kind of that first interview?
Sure. So, so I don't want to say like, the be on time, the look sharp, like, I'm like, that's table stakes. Like, you should be doing that anyway. I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. I want to talk about, doing your research, really, like if I'm interviewing with 3 companies, and like, working for a company is kind of like you're married to the company. Like, you're just for maybe a number of years, like, you have one opportunity to learn everything you can about this business before, and it's not about making a decision, it's about making an informed decision. So really do your research on who this business is, who's their kind of, ideal customer profile, how long have they been up and running, how many employees they have on LinkedIn, like, really do your research on the company that you're about to, potentially join, and there's so many great resources out there now. You got Glassdoor, you got LinkedIn, you got other things, G2s, if it's tech, stuff like that. So there's lots of different research platforms that you can do. But then the second thing would be for me is like, prepare some great questions. And what I'm not talking about is, how many vacation days do I get and all that. Like, the questions that you should, ask your hiring manager. Don't go into the interview asking those questions, So, but for me, like, just plan out some really hard hitting questions that's going to make you kind of stand out and be memorable. Bring a lot of energy to the room. Bring a pen and paper. Like, that is table stakes, but like, you wouldn't believe the amount of people who I've interviewed that just didn't, even bring a pen and paper to the meeting, and I'm not talking about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
No, as I say, we've all had that, right? Where you sit down and they're like, you get to talking, you're just watching the whole time. The only thing in your mind is like, well, I've had 2, right? Where one, they're like, oh, my printer, I couldn't get to the printer to print out their resume. And again, this is in person, right? It is a little different now. It's like, I don't care if you send it to a recruiter. If you're meeting in person, print out your resume. Just print it out, bring it with you, have it with you. And they're sitting there and they start talking, and you're just like, like you don't have a pen or paper in front of you. We're about to. This isn't getting. We're going to be done here soon. Well, Mace, just jump over to you. Phil, I'll come back to you on a couple of things, but kind of just on that prep for you, Mace. Like, what are some of the things you're looking for? So, Phil, it's a lot about the. I love that. Learn about the company. Learn the things to kind of start asking, and they're going to ask you what you know about the company as well. So, I think that's huge. What would you say, Mace?
Well, listen, going back to the whole kind of sales analogy around the whole kind of, landing the sales job, the interview, it's like, this is like demo prep, right? Pre-demo or pre-interview. It's like pre-demo prep. So I'm on the company's website. I'm on their YouTube page. I'm watching every single video that they have on YouTube just to understand who the company is, what it is they sell, what problem it is that they solve, who are their ideal customers. Like I'm doing my research for all of those things because I know I'm going to get the question at some point in time during the interview. Tell me what you know about us. Tell me what you know about the organization. Again, I can remember when I was prepping for the sales trainer role with you guys. I still have the Moleskin with 2 or 3 pages worth of notes that I took from the website, from LinkedIn, from Google searches, from all over the internet, the wiki, on the company, like all those things. So when I went into the interviews rather, I should say, because there were multiple of them, I had great confidence, with answering the question, and not only that, addressing it before the question even came up. So just to quickly touch on kind of Phil's point about the prep, like that is a must. Do your prep. It'll do you wonders in surprising and impressing the recruiter, the hiring manager, and anybody else that you might be interviewing with. And the other thing that's a big one for me, if you really want to surprise and impress me, know what your KPIs were for either your current or your previous job, and know your results against those KPIs. It's one thing to know, what your dials, books, and sats and such kind of expectations were, but what were your numbers against those KPIs? Be able to talk about, what you did for the month, for how you finished the quarter, as far as revenue, book sats, book to set. Again, whatever those KPIs are, be able to speak at a high level as to what your performance was against those numbers. And then the last thing, when it comes to knowing your KPIs and knowing what your results were, don't lie. Don't tell us you were number one, right? You were number one in revenue, 4 quarters in a row, and 299%. Like, be honest. So even if you did have an off quarter, the transparency and the honesty will go a long way, because we've all been in sales long enough to know that there's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows. Sales is a dance, right? There's good months, bad months. Good quarters, bad quarters, and sometimes it's out of your control. But again, if you can speak to that, again, we'll appreciate that honesty, that transparency, as opposed to you trying to tell us that you were God's gift to sales.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
you can sell anything.
You got to play the game a little bit. We're not saying don't play the game. Everybody wants to make themselves come across really well. But what Mace is saying is like, don't be the guy saying, "Oh, I'm number one. Yeah, no one could beat me. I was the best person on my team." Like, why are you looking for a job? Like, that company clearly would have tried to keep you if that was true. But like, be humble, I think, is a great way of putting it. So hey, maybe Tyler, I've missed target twice in the last 5 months. 3 of the months I crushed it, but the 2 I missed, here's why I think I missed, and here's what I'm doing about it actually. So like, that's the kind of stuff, people who are hiring want to hear. They want to hear that, if you did lose, you've learned from the lesson, and you're going to want to apply that as well.
No, those are really good points. I think so. Like, basically, we're saying research the company, right? Like, do your homework on the company. Make sure that before you show up, you do take a moment to kind of know your numbers. I think that's huge in sales, just in general. Like, write them down if you don't know them. And we were talking about this before, guys, but like, you're sitting across from somebody, Phil, to your point, oh yeah, it's number one. It's like, oh great, what was your target? And they're like, well, targets were they couldn't even explain their target to you. And you're like, what? There's no way, right? Either like, that tells me maybe you're number one of a one-person company. Absolutely, I might believe that, right? Or like there's just something off there, and so I 100% agree. I think just a couple of quick tips I would add before we, move on is I do think, people are going to ask about wins and losses. So before you go into an interview, I do think write down, they're going to ask some form of the question like, tell me about a time, right? Tell me about a time where you accomplished something great, or tell me about a time you ran into adversity and how you overcame it. Like you will get some form of those questions. So I would say prepare those, a win and a loss, right? In your win, talk about the team, right? They want basically to hear a little bit about how not only did you accomplish something, but they do want to see where it wasn't all you. To Phil's point earlier, be humble. And in your loss, like, what happened, but what did you learn from it? And then you want to do a real pro move, talk about how you had that, what you want learn from it, and then about how you later use that knowledge to face a similar situation. So I think having your wins and losses, and a super pro tip for me is, start reading a sales book. Get some sales, vocabulary in your system before you show up to an interview. Especially if you're new in a role, just start reading a sales book, get that vocabulary, read some podcasts, because it is a sales role and they do want to hear that language from you. So hopefully those are enough tips, again, kind of preparing for it. So now you're in the interview. So Phil, I think we can all agree, show up an hour and a half minimum early. If it's a Zoom meeting, be in there 45 minutes beforehand. Definitely want to make sure your eyes are nice and bloodshot. We can see how hungover you are from the night before. Have as many legal things sitting on the table behind you. Right. So anyway, I kid, but we've all had that in our Zoom calls or this and that. So Phil, for the interview itself, right? So the person is in there. What are some tips about maybe, how somebody should carry themselves in the email or in the interview, or maybe how they should be answering questions? I think some people can stumble up in an interview. Like, do you want to hear everything? Should they keep it short? Like, what are your thoughts on just how they should present the information in the interview?
It's a great question. So for me, like, mirroring in sales, like, if someone asks you a really long detailed question, you probably want to give them a detailed answer, but if someone asks, a pretty short, straightforward question, it should be a pretty straightforward answer. But, for me, how they should conduct themselves in an interview is just energy, body language, eye contact, like taking great notes. I'm not talking about like writing down every word that's said, but if it's something meaningful to you and if it's something that's important, it's communicated from the person who's interviewing you, they'll probably see you write it down and go, oh, I'm glad they wrote that down because that was an important point, But for me, like, someone who's slouched back in their chair and like not really engaging with me too much, you can tell, like, I think we know it's like 70% of communication is body language, So, but the energy in the room, being positive, Tyler, I know one of your pet peeves is, bashing your former company and stuff like that. Like that's a no-no, like whatever your experience was in your last company, they were amazing. It's just time for a new challenge. It's just so easy to say that, even if you had a nightmare experience. But the biggest advice I have is just, your body language, eye contact, energy. And, my biggest advice for anyone stepping into a sales interview is I can tell, like, I put so much weight on the questions that you ask during and at the end of the interview. Like, I can almost tell if it's kind of a snapshot into like what kind of experience you would give our customers. How would you kind of do a discovery? Like if you're asking like pretty silly basic questions that like, don't really tell me you're a curious person. Like, be curious, ask as many great questions as you possibly can. So that's what my big advice would be. But like,
so what are some examples of those great questions? Like, because I think that's, yeah, I mean, what do you think in terms of like, what are some questions you've heard in the past that you really loved, or maybe ones you'd recommend to be asking? Sure.
I would say, Tyler, who's your top salesperson right now and why? What are the kind of key traits that they have? And how can you replicate that as a business? That would be one. Number two, what are you looking for in this candidate? What's really important to you? What's the training program? Like, how can I come in and scale up as quickly as I possibly can? I also might want to start to suggest some even in entry level roles, I might even have a document with my 30, 60, 90 plan, ask, hey, Tyler, I've put this together. We don't need to go through every line, but, am I on the right lines, and thinking how quickly I can scale up, or how does this, work for you guys? Really specific questions about, joining and ramping up to be as successful as possible, as quickly as possible. That's kind of, some of the better questions and experiences I've had in interviews around those questions.
No, I agree. I think a lot of times you get the candidates that come in there and they're kind of grilling you, right? Because, and anybody watching this, you will see the things online where they're like, find out how's your top performer doing? How are they doing? All these different things about their KPIs and the OTEs and all this and that. And it's like, and here's the way I would say it. I think Phil's exactly right, is later in the interview process, I think, but you're really going to be turning off your hiring manager if that entire first conversation is just all about, are they going to get you to your target? That first interview, I think, is more about, how can we get to my target? If that makes a little bit more sense, right? Like, it's not all on either party. And I think sometimes candidates will really put it on the company, and the company will sometimes really put it on the candidate. And like, no, it is definitely a joint effort. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there, Phil, right? Is like, ask these questions, like, what does that training look like? Here's my plan. How does that mesh with what you guys kind of do? That sort of thing. Is that right?
Be curious in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Mace, what do you think? So you're in the room, right? In the room where it happens, right? During the interview, what are some tips you would give about, being in that room, or to give themselves a leg up during that first kind of interview?
Absolutely. So I think, and again, going back to the whole, treat this like, your sales process, right? Now we're in discovery, right? This is what this is, right? And it's two-sided, right? The hiring manager is doing some discovery on you, and you should be doing some discovery on them as well. But so as it relates to answering the hiring manager's questions, I think it's important to be mindful of framing your answers kind of back to what the job description and what the expectations were of the role. I think that's one way to, again, set yourself apart from everybody else. So kind of going back to doing your research, every sales job posting has a description of what the job entails, at a very high level, what you're doing and what the expectations are. So I think as you're being asked questions about, your experience, your background, what you've done, so on and so forth, find ways to kind of weave in answers that kind of tie back to the description and the expectations of the role. Now, on the flip side of that, when you're asking your questions, I mean, Phil is spot on. I'm curious about, tell me about the sales team. Tell me about the SDR team, right? How many SDRs are there? How many AEs are there, right? What are their KPIs, right? Kind of walk me through what their day-to-day looks like, right? I want to get an understanding of, how the business, how the team operates, right? Who manages the SDRs, who manages the SCs? How would you describe them as a sales leader, right? What are their expectations, of the people on their team? Phil referenced the top performers. Tell me about your top performers. Why are they so successful? What's setting them apart from everyone else? What are they doing differently, right? What's the pathway to promotion within this team? So those are the kind of questions that you want to be asking that hiring managers. Understand the dynamic of the sales team. Let's not forget, right? Who are we selling to? Right. I understand that you guys sell this, but tell me about like who you guys are going after. In that sense, what are the challenges the reps run into? And what do you guys have in place to overcome those challenges? So again, be a sponge, and again, ask lots of questions to understand the role, and then not just answer those questions, add some respond back to that question with a little bit of context of, here's what I've done, or here are some thoughts that I have, regarding, how I could do that, and why I see myself being able to fit right in to your team, but also add some value because of, my previous experiences. So again, I think those are some things that'll, surprise, impress, and wow that hiring manager, and again, set you apart from, everyone else that's just simply asking about salary, commission, and benefits when they're asked, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah.
Right.
I love something you're talking about in there, not explicitly, but you're kind of implying like, talking about how you are going to fit onto the, not just the numbers, but the kind of culture, team spirit, like that is a big deal. They want to make sure, because going into any job, I don't care what the industry is, like if you're working as a team, right, when, for the most part, you're going to be immediately sitting down with a group of other individuals, and they want to know that there's not going to be this. This is a big deal for companies, because if I bring in somebody that's negative, I mean, it's just a cancer on the floor, and like there's nothing worse than that. And so I think, asking a little bit about, okay, what, tell me about the team, what are they like, which kind of points to my probably number one tip that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, that I would just wanted to add, was ask who your hiring manager or who your direct manager is going to be. So find out. A lot of times you are meeting with that person. A lot of times in that interview, they'll say, "Oh, that's me. That's why I'm meeting with you." But also a lot of times, like, for larger companies, I wouldn't know. I would already be through hired through training, before they kind of decided based on openings on teams where I was going. But you want to see if you can find that out, because to me, the most important thing, besides job or a head of commission, a head of like remote, any of that is who's my boss going to be. Because if I can work at a small company and my boss is some badass salesperson, I meet them and I'm like, hell yeah, dude, I love this person, right? And I had that, like my first, this woman called Roxanne, just badass MFer. Like she was awesome, and she taught me a lot of sales, and I was fortunate, right? But if you're at a larger company, maybe you get a great sales training department and you have access to that. So I think who your leader is does have a lot to do with it, in terms of, especially early on. Later on, who cares who your leader is, because you're going to be working remote, working enterprise. You're, half hour a week probably on a call with them, so it doesn't matter anymore. But early on, it really does matter. They are the ones that are going to be running the team huddles, giving you all the one-to-one training. You want to meet them and make sure that you mesh well with them as well. So sort of one question though, you guys were talking about there, I want to get your opinion on this. So you're asked, so you're in the room, you're being asked, all right, what are your goals? What are you looking for? What are your guys' thoughts on, I want to move into leadership? Within the next year or so, I want to move into leadership. And I ask that because I want to give a small warning. Everybody's going to say that in their interview. So one thing, have a clear why, like what do you want? Me personally, you can hear where I'm at with it, is I just think so many people say it that saying it almost makes you feel like you don't stand out. I want to hear a different answer than, I would like to move into leadership in the next year. Not saying you can't say that, but have something else that's motivating you, because everybody else you're up against is going to say that exact same thing. And the person that's going to stand out to me is the person that says, well, I want to be in this role that I'm in right now. I want to crush through that. I want to be the number one. And then I want to go into this, this, and this. And they talk about their role that they're in and how they progress within that role, not necessarily within the company, if that makes sense. Because that's how it works anyway. So Phil, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I want to answer that question, but I also want to just pivot back to something we were talking about a moment ago about like great questions to ask, and you just reminded me, about asking about the progression structure in the business and what you would need to do to get to that next role. That's always a great question to ask in an interview. But in terms of what you just
and a good company will have that defined. I think it's important
absolutely.
to say, like, they will have that defined. Yeah.
If you ask that question and get the answer, maybe, we'll figure it out when we get there. It's a big red flag. Okay, so
I think I left my car running. I'll be
okay.
So in terms of mentioning that you're interested in leadership, I don't always. I quite like hearing that. But you're absolutely right, Tyler. A lot of people will say that, but maybe my advice would be, keen to hear Mace's thoughts on this as well. But my advice would be, frame it differently. Hey, I've been leaders in XYZ, whether it's like sports teams or coaching roles or whatever it might have been. I've had XYZ leadership experience. That's something that's really important to me in my career. Obviously, I think step one is me coming in and crushing the role and maybe getting to the more senior level of the role. But are there some leadership opportunities within the business going to be available within the next couple of years. I think I'd kind of keep it generic rather than like, what do I need to be a leader? I've got a 12-month timeline and I need to have a team. It's just, for me, I like to hear that people are interested in leadership, and absolutely, like, a business is nothing but a collection of individuals. And if all of those individuals are leading each other and inspiring each other, that's an amazing place to be. So I think it's fine to mention it. I think, demonstrate why it's important to you, and link it to, how you can progress within the role and what maybe future opportunities might be available. That's kind of how I'd go about it.
That's a really good point, because I think as long as you're linking it to a long-term tenure within the business, it becomes a positive. You're right. How many of the times you hear like, well, within the next 12 months, I'd like to be the senior vice president of sales. I mean, is that possible? What do you think? And you're like, what? Whoa. You're here for the SDR role, right? So right. Mace, what are your thoughts on that? Those are good points, Phil. What are your thoughts on that, Mace?
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because I think of myself as like the ultimate like optimist, right? And I see the bright side of things. But when I when I hear young sales guys talking about they want to get into leadership, I'm like, oh man, they have no idea.
Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do
Billy
that?
Madison, don't you say that? Don't you ever say that? Stay where
Right.
you are for as long as you can.
Right. And it's funny, right? It made me think about why I wanted to get into leadership. And the first reason I wanted to get into leadership earlier in my sales career was so that I could get off the phones. That was my number one reason. Right?
That's the
that
first
was the number one reason, right? It was just to get off the phones, right? Yeah, I didn't want to be, 50 years old, still making cold calls. But for me, the question back is why. I want to understand why. I'm not opposed to being told that, but I want to understand why it is that you want to get into leadership, and why do you see yourself as someone that would make a good leader? And we all know on this call that being a great leader is, you're not born that way. It is a skill that is developed over years and years of conflict management is how I think about leadership, right? Trial and error, along the way. And so again, I just, for me, it's tell me more about why. Just for myself, once I got into leadership and got punched in the mouth plenty of times, and whether it was made bad hires or didn't handle situations the right way, or dealing with the stresses of performing at a high level consistently, I later on shifted the reason for being in the leadership. And what keeps me in leadership is helping salespeople accomplish their personal, professional, and financial goals. That is and has been my why for being in leadership for a very long time now. It's a long time coming from, I just want to get off the phones, right? And so again, it might be too premature to have that as your why if you're brand new to sales, and maybe you were the captain on your football team in high school or something like that, and you were you've led some groups of some sort. I think that's awesome. But yeah, just have some context behind why, and really think about if you want to get into sales leadership, because we all know it is no joke. However, it is extremely rewarding when you've got salespeople that are accomplishing their personal and professional financial goals. People you've worked with years ago kind of hit you up out of the blue just to say thank you for everything that you did, or they hit you up asking you for some sales tips to help them in their current role. Like that is really rewarding, and that's a whole nother topic. That could be a whole nother podcast episode, as far as the leadership motivations. But ultimately, have a why, and have one that's more than I just want to get off the phone.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's a good point, right? When you jump in, and yes, there's definitely a podcast in there about going into leadership and what drives you, because we all thought, oh, I want to be a leader, I'll make more money. That's when you were bad on the phone and you weren't hitting quota. Then once you start getting good and you hit quota, you're like, there's no money in leadership anyway. But I think you're absolutely right there, Mace. Like, get that why, like, have a motivator, like what is gonna, and have a good story. And you don't have to get, you get as personal as you want. I had some really good feedback from me one time after an interview, and I landed the job. But a couple months in, I was talking to this person. I was telling them something had happened. They said, next interview, tell that story. They said, tell that story, right? And I said, yeah, but doesn't it? They're like, who cares? Like, if you get the job, then you're right for telling a story. If you don't get the job, you'll never talk to that person again. So who cares? So I do think, but hopefully everybody kind of watching this got a good sense. Like, how would you go about it? Like, look, couple of tips in there about how to actually strategize to find that next sales role and how to approach into those businesses to get that interview. And then once you get the interview, some tips on how to prep and how to handle yourself within that interview. Phil, would you give us just kind of before we jump off here, just one or two maybe takeaways or final points you want to make sure the audience has?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to a couple of key points, which is find a great company, like find a really great company that excites you and a product that you're, interested in talking about a lot, because in sales, you're going to be hopefully there for a long time, a number of years. It's like, get something exciting that you want to talk about. And number two, when you are going into that interview would be like, this is like, if you could interview your next relationship, if your next partner, there's a couple of key questions that would be, really great signs that it could be a big hit, or there could be some red flags that like might put you off. Like, what does those questions look like? Not only do your research and do your prep, but make your prep obvious. Hey, Mace, I see you guys just opened an office in Scottsdale. Like, congratulations. Is there more offices being opened over the next couple of years? So make that prep obvious. But when you're in that room, like, yes, I'm not talking about lying, but sell yourself. If you can't sell yourself, Tyler would say you can't sell, and I know that's one of his expressions, but like, it's like a first date, like you both should walk out of the room going, wow, that person was really great, so those would be my key final points.
And just to add to that, because your point earlier of the energy, I don't think it can be overstated, right? Like, good salespeople, they do, we all know the exception. I know, I worked with this guy who I don't think I'd ever seen him with a human emotion, and he crushed through target, this and that. But most salespeople, like, their energies, them right away. So, get prepared for it and try to bring your, highest energy self. You don't need to be fake. That's true. Like, be yourself. But yeah, it's a really, really good points there, Phil. Mace, any, takeaway or last points you want to, one or two you want to make sure the audience has?
Yeah, I would just reiterate, treating this entire process like a sales process, right? You've got your prospecting, right? Looking for the right types of businesses that you want to work for. Your prep for the interviews, right? Making sure you've got all your ducks in a row as far as that, so you can go into those meetings with confidence. The discovery piece, right? And that's twofold, right? Nail the discovery, nail your responses to the questions that they ask you, but then also have some powerful questions that make them think as well, and create some curiosity on their end as well too. And it's interesting, your pitch and your close is in that conversation, right? The close is in your responses to their questions, and then the questions that you ask, right? And then also just all of those soft skills, right? The confidence, it is the energy, the enthusiasm that you exude, the connection you make with the hiring manager on that call as well too. And so again, I say it all the time, right? Sales isn't everything. So think of your interview as it is, as a sales call. We are always selling. Every morning, I'm selling myself on why I should get up and go to the gym, right? And not hit the snooze button, right? Or I'm selling the kids on, why they should, get up and do their homework, and why they should get outside, not play video games all day. Like, everything I'm constantly selling my wife on things, right? We all are, I'm sure, right? And so, that my last thought is, treat this, the interview process the same way, we respect and treat the sales process.
Nice. I absolutely thought you said sales isn't everything, and I was about to say, Phil, I think we got an opening here. Guys, I really appreciate it. For me, my final would be one of the biggest things is, your first job or two, I don't know if it's going to be good or not. Like sometimes you just have to get in there. And Mace had made this point on a different conversation of taking your first year or whatever, and at least you're getting the reps in. You're using it, for what it is. So my mother always had this great expression, which was, I was looking for a job when I found this one, right? So like it's something to bear in mind that you don't want to just settle. Right. But especially early on, sometimes you just do, because companies want a bit of experience. And I can tell you, one of the things I'm grateful for is I spent, first couple of years in kind of B2C space, which got me so many reps. And those reps were probably the most important thing. And I think it'd be challenging sometimes. I see people come in and they're in slow paced sales environments, and it can take them a year to get 100 or so reps. Right. Whereas I was having those daily, so to me, like the big takeaway is, go in, make the most of whatever job you can get, like take all the advice from, all of us today, Phil, Mace, myself, go in with higher energy and just be optimistic about the future. And when you get, and once you do land that role, just make the absolute most of it that you can, because obviously we're always going to be a student of sales. So where you are now is not where you're going to be a year, 5 years from now, regardless. So continue to be a student of sales, continue to improve the craft, and you're always, always, always going to be on the right trajectory, and we're all going to make it. So guys, I really appreciate your time today. We will see you here next time. Please do like, subscribe, and follow us on LinkedIn or other social media platforms. But Phil, thank you so much. Mace,
Thanks,
thank you
Tyler.
so much. Everybody
Thanks,
watching.
Pleasure.
Thank you so
See you
much.
guys.